Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Global Passport Investor. I'm your host, Eric Major, the chairman and CEO of Latitude World, where our clients expect a world and we deliver it. So, today I want to speak to you about why two or even three is better than one. Now, what am I referring to? Obviously, I'm talking about citizenship and passports. And of course, two or three would be better than one. You would expect a company like us to say that. But is that true in this day and age where globalization and geopolitics are really forcing us to think hard and well about where we call home or who we are? Well, I'm going to give you a few analogies. They're not all perfect because citizenship is unique, but we wouldn't be thinking twice about why we should have two or three or four credit cards, right? It's not that we need four credit cards in our wallet. It's just one of those things where you expect or you would hope to have a plan B or another option should one of them not work. Obviously, we know there's MasterCard and there's Visa and there's Amex. So some merchants will ask one over the other or require one over the other. So that's another reason. Which, by the way, we could put as an example or akin to why you would have another passport in terms of access to other countries that one would give you over the other. So credit cards are the same in that regard. And it's just in case one's not working, in case one is lost, in case the merchant doesn't accept one, then you have the other. So we don't think twice about that. We don't think twice about this notion of asset diversification, right? We've all learned in school, and those of you who have enough wealth would know to diversify your asset in different asset class, pursuant maybe to objectives and your risk tolerance and things of that nature. So you put some money in equities and combine it maybe with bonds and different options and the like, and property as well. So as you see, each asset class has its features, and often we will look and asset managers will look at maximizing that asset allocation to suit your objectives and your risk profile. So we don't think about that. We all agree it's not wise to put everything into one basket. And I would argue the same when it comes to citizenship. Um, and you'd say, well, Eric, is that fair that you're actually, comparing nationality and citizenship to credit cards and to holding bonds or versus equities? That doesn't sound or feel right. Okay, I understand that. I could get that. It is something different insofar as the emotional connectivity and link that we have to the nations in which we are born, or in some cases to the nation we adopted. That is absolutely true. There's more than a transactional element to citizenship, as the European Court of Justice recently reiterated in its court ruling against Malta. So we get that, and that is a fair comment. But the point I'm making is that it's something that is naturally for human beings to be thinking about how I want to diversify my personal exposure, my personal risk, and that of my family, but also at the same time open myself up to an opportunity, to an experience of living and working abroad. And how empowering and enriching is that when you have that opportunity through the status you acquired to be somewhere else in the world? I don't know anyone, I've never met anyone who said, oh, I went to this country, I stayed there for a year. Such a bad idea. I wish I never did it. They always say it's been enriching and rewarding, certainly when you do it as well as a family. It's not to say that it's always easy. Often that first year can be a little bit challenging, but I've never met anyone who said, "Oh, that was not a good idea. I wish I'd never left the United States or Canada to go live in Europe or to go live in Asia." It's always a positive experience, an enriching experience. So for that reason alone as well, you may be inclined to say, well, how can I get status in this country that I want to spend a bit more time in or should spend more time in? And so I get the tabooness of this concept of comparing, let's say, citizenship to credit cards and assets that are being managed by professionals. But in the same way, in this day and age, it ought not be a taboo. In the same way that 200 years ago, I was reading in a book not too long ago that 200 years ago it was said that insurance was was a taboo subject. This idea of buying yourself protection in the event that something terrible would happen was viewed by many in society at the time as, how could you do that? You have to let world life transform and materialize itself. How could you be trying to hedge against that and get some kind of pecuniary and financial benefit from that? And people would say, well, yeah, but otherwise it could destroy my life. It could destroy my family if I don't have this kind of protection. And so we don't think twice about, wanting to insure our house or our cars or any particular, against any particular event. That's just common knowledge and accepted knowledge and practice for today. Uh, but 200 years ago, there was a lot of debate around that whole insurance industry and what it was trying to protect. And I would say the same about nationality, about citizenship, about residency, about all these investment migration solutions that we here at Latitude offer. Um, it's worth exploring really what is it that you see as being an issue, and how we could maybe address that if indeed it's a concern. What I would say is, I'm a Canadian who's nationalized here in the UK. I'm proud to say I'm a citizen of both, but it doesn't take away my Canadianness because I have a UK passport, just like if you were an American and got yourself permanent resident status in New Zealand or citizenship in Europe, that you'd be less American. That's what I would be suggesting to those in the audience who are wondering about that. So listen, in this day and age where so much is happening, I think what we are seeing is more and more Americans coming to understand that you don't want to necessarily be hostage to a political or a social or even a global event like we just experienced 5 years ago, right, with the pandemic, where all of a sudden you're kept hostage or locked in because the nationality you hold doesn't allow you to go elsewhere in the world. For those of you who remember, in the early days of the pandemic in 2020, in that March April period, Americans were not able to fly from New York to Toronto or London or Sydney on the back of their American passport, because of how the world had felt COVID was being addressed in America. They closed their borders to Americans during that period, during those early weeks and months of the pandemic. And people would say, well, how can I go to that meeting in London? Well, if you had an Antigua passport, you'd be able to get on that plane. Or if you had a Maltese citizenship, you would have been able to get on that plane. Is a small but relevant example. I'll give you another one. I remember years ago, we were talking to the HR department of a large American oil company. And they were just after the Iraq war, going there to develop some of the infrastructure and help the Iraqis rebuild their infrastructure. And so these were Americans who were going to Baghdad and other parts of the country to support the redevelopment of the oil infrastructure. And it was wise of the company at the time, thinking, well, it's maybe not the best thing to enter the country on a US passport. Maybe for that work, we can make them Antiguan or Grenadian or Kittian. And so we did. We got them citizenship in other parts of the Caribbean that offer these solutions so that when they fly into Baghdad and check in at the Best Western Hotel, they're Antiguan or they're St. Lucian, and therefore have a different geopolitical, um, let's say, welcome than had they at that early stage been purely American. So all that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Right. So those are just simple examples right there. Let alone the fact that sometimes a passport expires and then you got to go somewhere and you say, "Oh, I didn't renew my passport," but you have another one that it's still valid. Simple things like that make it very obvious as to why two or three is better than one. I hope you agree. And the final thing I want to touch on is this idea of link and genuine link and connectivity and emotional tie that we all have to our homeland or to the one that we develop. And it's similar in nature around many sports. In fact, I'm going to give the example that some of you would know. I'm Canadian, and therefore will refer to our religion, our sport religion, which is hockey. And if you go back to the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, and you wanted to play for the Montreal Canadiens, you had to be a French Canadian from Montreal. That was pretty much what the team was made of. And as the years progress into the 60s and 70s, and certainly in the 80s and 90s, hockey teams just like football teams here in the UK, opened themselves up to the Russians and to the Swedes and to Americans included, so that teams in Canada, no less my favorite team, Montreal Canadiens, were very diversified in the nationality mix of that team, and made it obviously a better team, right? So, in the same way, countries improved, yes, you always hear by immigration, from immigration, but also for those who become citizens of that nation. It's in that same vein. We're better and stronger together as one, adhering to one nationhood, I guess. So this is something that is really the underpinning mission for Latitude. We're making it our mission to empower as many Americans as we can to acquire second residency or citizenship in another country. If anything, to open the door to experiencing that country, but also as a means to protecting, just like insurance still does today, although questionably so 200 years ago. So hopefully that all makes sense. If you have any questions or comments, I invite you to leave them at the bottom of the YouTube comment section there. Otherwise, feel free to send us a note. If you go to our website, latitudeworld.com, you'll have an opportunity to drop us an email or make your comments known, and we'll be happy to get back to you. So thank you once again for listening, and we look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Thank you.